I'll expand it into a full-length dramatic story in a viral-style narrative. You just make coffee. The CEO mocked a single dad, then he fixed a $90 million error. The glass doors of Orion Tech Solutions slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, and Aaron Blake stepped inside for the first time as an employee. He wasn't supposed to be there. At least, not in the eyes of most people who walked those polished marble floors. Aaron was 34, a single father of a 7-year-old boy, and a temporary contract worker hired through an outsourcing agency. His job title on paper was simple, almost insulting in its simplicity. Office support, beverage services. In plain terms, he made coffee, restocked supplies, and cleaned meeting rooms after executives left. People barely noticed him, and that was exactly why he survived there. Orion Tech wasn't just any company. It was one of the fastest-growing tech giants in the country, handling financial systems, cloud infrastructure, and government contracts worth billions. Inside those walls, even silence felt expensive. Aaron adjusted his worn backpack, scanned the lobby, and headed toward the break room. He had learned quickly. Don't take elevators during rush hours, don't make eye contact with executives, and never, ever speak unless spoken to. He needed this job. His son, Liam, needed medicine for his asthma. Rent was overdue again, and the school had already sent 3 reminder notices about fees. So Aaron made coffee. That was his world now. The CEO of Orion Tech, Richard Caldwell, was a man who built his empire on precision, arrogance, and control. He believed mistakes were for people who didn't belong in boardrooms. On Monday morning, Richard walked into the executive floor surrounded by assistants and advisors. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Screens were turned off. He was reviewing the upcoming quarterly deployment of Orion Cloud Nexus, a system responsible for processing financial transactions for multiple international clients. It was supposed to be flawless. But Richard had been in a bad mood all week. A competitor had just announced a rival product, and investors were pressuring him for even faster rollout. And then he saw him, Aaron, walking out of the executive pantry carrying a tray of coffee cups. Richard stopped. He frowned slightly, as if something about Aaron offended him. "Who is that?" he asked sharply. One of the managers glanced over. "Contract staff, sir. Beverage support." Richard looked him up and down. Aaron nodded politely and stepped aside. But Richard didn't move on. Instead, he smirked. "You just make coffee," he said, loud enough for a few nearby employees to hear. A couple of people shifted uncomfortably. Aaron said nothing. Richard continued, almost amused by his own superiority. "People like you don't understand how things work here. Just stick to what you're hired for." The room went silent. Aaron lowered his eyes slightly. "Yes, sir," he said calmly, and walked away. But something in him didn't break. It hardened. What no one knew was that Aaron had not always been coffee guy. 3 years ago, he had been a systems engineer at a mid-tier tech firm, working on back-end infrastructure, debugging distributed networks, and optimizing transaction pipelines. He had been good, very good. But life doesn't always respect talent. His wife had passed away suddenly from a heart condition, leaving him alone with a newborn son. The medical bills, legal issues, and emotional collapse that followed forced him out of his job. He couldn't handle both survival and code deadlines anymore. So he disappeared from the industry, took whatever work he could find, and eventually ended up at Orion Tech as contract support. No one ever bothered to check his background deeply, which was a mistake. That evening, long after most employees had left, Aaron was still in the building. He wasn't supposed to be, but he had noticed something strange while cleaning the executive conference room. A projection screen was still logged into a diagnostic panel for Orion Cloud Nexus. Lines of system logs were scrolling unusually fast. Aaron paused. He shouldn't look, but old instincts kicked in. He leaned closer, and his expression slowly changed. Something was wrong, very wrong. The next morning, panic hit the engineering floor. A $90 million transaction routing failure had been detected in a simulated stress test of Orion Cloud Nexus. It wasn't live yet, but if it had gone live, the system would have misrouted financial transactions across multiple banking partners. Millions could have been lost within minutes. The senior engineers were scrambling. This shouldn't be happening, one of them muttered. We tested this module 3 times, another said. Richard Caldwell arrived within minutes. What happened? He demanded. No one had an answer. The lead architect wiped sweat from his forehead. There's a logic failure in the transaction validation layer, but it doesn't make sense. It passed all QA checks. Richard's face darkened. I want answers. Now. And then, quietly, a voice came from behind them. I think I know what happened. Everyone turned. It was Aaron, still holding a cleaning cloth. Still in his uniform. Richard narrowed his eyes. You. A few engineers exchanged confused looks. Aaron stepped forward carefully. I saw your staging logs last night. The system is misclassifying high-frequency microtransactions under a legacy routing flag. The lead engineer frowned. That's impossible. That module was deprecated. Aaron shook his head. It wasn't fully removed. It's still being called indirectly through the failover bridge. Silence. Then disbelief. Richard let out a short laugh. You really think you understand this system better than my engineers? Aaron didn't react. He simply said, I built systems like this before. That made a few heads turn. Richard stared at him for a moment, then gestured toward the board. Show me. What happened next changed everything. Aaron walked to the console, plugged in a temporary access terminal, and began tracing the network flow. Lines of code filled the screen. Fast, precise, unhesitating. Within minutes, he isolated the fault. A hidden dependency loop between legacy routing and the new AI-based transaction optimizer was causing misclassification under load conditions. It was subtle, almost invisible, but catastrophic. He highlighted the exact line. There, he said. One of the senior engineers leaned in. His face changed instantly. Oh my God. He stepped back. That would have gone live next week. Richard's expression hardened. He didn't like what he was seeing. But he couldn't deny it. Aaron had found it, where a full engineering team had missed it. Silence filled the room. Then Richard spoke, slowly. How long will it take to fix? Aaron thought for a moment. If I rewrite the routing abstraction layer and isolate the legacy bridge, 6 hours. Maybe less. A senior VP immediately interrupted. That's not protocol. We need a change review board, compliance sign-off, rollback simulations. We don't have time, Aaron said calmly. Everyone looked at him, even Richard. For a moment, the arrogance in the room collided with reality. A $90 million failure had already been detected. And the only person offering a solution was the man they mocked for making coffee. Richard stared at him for a long time. Then said, do it. For the next 5 hours, Aaron worked like he had never left the industry. Code flowed through him like memory. He didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't ask permission. He rebuilt the routing logic, patched the dependency loop, and simulated load conditions in real time. The system stabilized, then improved, then exceeded previous performance benchmarks. Finally, the red warning indicators disappeared. The system was clean. A full silence filled the engineering floor. Then one engineer whispered, it's fixed. Another added, and faster than before. No one spoke for a moment. Then Richard Caldwell walked slowly toward Aaron. For once, he didn't look superior. He looked uncertain. You did this? He asked quietly. Aaron nodded. Yes. Richard glanced at the screen. Then back at him. The same man he had mocked just yesterday. You never told anyone you had this background. Aaron wiped his hands. No one asked. That hit harder than expected. Later that evening, Richard stood alone in his office, looking at the financial projection report. If the error had gone live, the company would have lost $90 million in the first hour. Possibly more in lawsuits. Possibly irreparable damage to reputation. He leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Humility. He pressed the intercom. Bring him to my office. When Aaron entered, Richard didn't speak immediately. He studied him, then finally said, you saved this company. Aaron didn't respond emotionally. He just nodded slightly. Richard continued, I made a mistake. A long pause. I judged you unfairly. Aaron looked at him calmly. I've been judged worse. That silence again. Then Richard stood up. I want you on my engineering team. Aaron blinked slightly. That's not how contracts work. I'll fix that, Richard said. Another pause. Then, quietly, "And I owe you an apology." Aaron looked down for a moment. Then said, "Just don't judge people by what they carry on a tray." Richard didn't respond immediately, then nodded. "I won't." Weeks later, Aaron wasn't making coffee anymore. He was leading system architecture improvements for Orion Cloud Nexus. And every time new engineers joined the team, Richard made sure they learned one lesson first. Never assume someone's worth based on their title. Because sometimes, the person you overlook is the one who saves everything.